Hi, May 5th, and today we come to the end of David's reign, and Solomon is taking the throne, though they don't officially separate. It's really called co-regency, and this is an example that becomes a pattern that follows where the one on the throne brings along another one alongside, and they just kind of stay ruling together, and the one just drops away. It's not like the one resigns and goes off and rides off into the sunset and the other one takes over. It's kind of a nice little model for succession that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But be that as it may, David is old. There's an account in there about another son who is trying to take over the throne. Ultimately, we see in the account that Bathsheba and Nathan work to make sure Solomon does get the throne, and they get David to get out of his deathbed and basically make sure Solomon is appointed and takes the throne. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about today. There's that interesting piece in here about Abishag, the Shunammite woman, and in case you didn't pick up on it, let me tell you clearly. Abishag is more than a nurse here. I was thinking about that because there is a verse in there that says David did not know her. In other words, he did not have sexual relations with her. And I thought, really? How nice. She's going to lie with him and keep him warm because David couldn't keep warm. He was getting old. And that was all there was to it. Well, as we look a little further into it, and I kind of look through some historical writings, there are basically historians who have said that this idea of bringing in a younger woman, especially with a man here, and having her lie with him was considered a medical practice and a medicinal treatment in those days that was often prescribed. Galen, the Greek physician, recommended that the health and the heat of a young body could be transferred to that of an aging patient as treatment. Nice, if it works. Josephus, the famous historian who many refer to often because his writings coincide and he gives us kind of an objective account of what went on in the Bible, also spoke of this practice as a medical treatment. Now, when you read these verses in the NIV, the phrase says, "Let her attend the king and take care of them." Well, that sounds very nice. In other translations, in the Septuagint, for instance, in the ancient Hebrew, it's much more graphic, basically stating, "Let her excite him and lie with him." And I think that's interesting. Then we go on, of course, to what I said in verse 4, where it says David did not know her, which really means David did not have sexual relations with her. However, I think it's important here to understand it does not say he didn't try. Because in ancient times, this idea of youthful vigor and a man's virility very much was considered a test for whether or not he should remain on the throne. You could be old and you could have a hard time staying warm, but if you were not virile, if you could no longer produce, then that was grounds to have you find a replacement. And so it's interesting that we have this account here, and it may very well be, for all we know, that David did try and couldn't at this point in his life. And again, that's just speculation. All that being said, the pattern here is that we have David, this man who was a giant killer, this man who slew thousands, is no longer physically able. And yet, as we go on and we have that piece with Bathsheba and Nathan, I think it also shows us, though, mentally he was still competent. He was still able to respond to the threat to Solomon taking the throne. I guess what I want to draw from that today is that physical and chronological aging is not the determining factor when it comes to what makes people old. And thank the Lord for that, because my body's telling me that I'm getting old at 56. There's definitely signs of aging. There's beginnings of decline. And sometimes that can get us down. And I'm wondering, as we know, David's son Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, and in chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes you can find all sorts of references to how people kind of think when they're getting old, and I wonder if he was looking at his father and thinking about some of those things. Do we let little things throw us? Do we tremble at challenges that are placed before us? Do we get to the point where we glorify the past and we're kind of resigned to things as they are in the present? Those are the things that really show our age. And clearly those were the things in David's life that were not present. And even when we think back to Moses, it mentions the fact that even though he was old, he had not lost that fire in his eyes. David is the same way. And I think they continue to burn with a love and a desire for the Lord. And I think that would be a great example for all of us to follow as well. I was thinking about my grandmother, who at the ripe old age of 100, on her birthday, rode a motorcycle, who at that same age was still living in her home, growing potatoes in her garden, though she was nearly blind, who at that same age and for many, many years read through the Bible each year. Ultimately, over those last years, she had a set of audio Bible cassettes, and she would listen. She died at the age of 105, and though, as I remember it, she constantly complained to God because of all her physical ailments and that he might just take her home. The reality was she never gave up, and she used every day that God gave her to live in faithful praise to him. I like that kind of outlook and picture for my life, and I pray that that's what God would create in me and would help me as the years continue to unfold to overcome the physical decline and the kind of stress it puts on our outlook many times, at least in my life. Way it can depress us and make us not look forward to things. And my prayer today is that I might follow the example, if not of Moses and David, at least of my grandmother, and live a life that's full to the end, and not let the years make me old and tell me I'm old, but follow God faithfully, to love him and to serve him every day that he gives me, all with a sense of forward-looking joy to what is to come. And as Paul said, to press on towards the goal for the prize that awaits. And I pray that for you as well, and look forward to talking to you again.